Our next speaker is Stephen Jones, and then our last speaker for the morning will be Professor Warren. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. I just want to say it's a privilege and an honor to address the board. As an introduction, my name is Steve Jones, and I'm the Director of Human Resources for Chandler Concrete Company in Burlington, North Carolina, which by definition is a small business. Unlike most of the speakers that have been up here before you today and yesterday, I'm not here as a designated or official representative of any specific or particular group. I'm not an expert. I'm not an attorney. I guess you can say my interest and purpose is to offer the perspective of the impact of the proposed changes on the individuals who will be most effective, the employees. I'm just a regular human resources practitioner who's in the trenches every day. I've worked as an HR professional for almost 30 years as an employee advocate, and I've supported employees at every level of an organization, from entry level to the most highly skilled, to include manufacturing plants, distribution centers, healthcare facilities, and office environments. They've included union and union-free workplaces. I've spoken to my colleagues and have felt strongly to come before the board. Let me begin by saying that regardless of the company or environment where I've worked, the day-to-day focus of the employees in these organizations has been on producing the product or service to meet the needs of their customers. The time is not spent on discussing the pros and cons or impact of collective bargaining or the legal aspects of an organizing campaign. Similarly, the focus of the management teams in every company where I've worked has been on ensuring that the business remains competitive with the products and services it provides to its customers, both short and long term. The time is not spent discussing how to define bargaining units or discussing behavioral, verbal nuances that might constitute unfair labor practices. That being said, based on my experience and in conversation with many of my HR colleagues, the board's proposed rule to accelerate the representation process will in fact create an undue hardship on both employees and employers similarly, and should not be adopted in its recommended form. In this age of technology, there's a propensity to try to do things quicker and faster, but we all know that quicker and faster does not always mean better. Unnecessarily rushing or accelerating the process will create a significant disadvantage for the employees who will be affected by the ultimate outcome. It will result in a loss of information to make an informed and educated decision about their work future, and also it would increase the likelihood and probability of error by employers, which would be bad for employees. While there might be some opportunity for administrative changes to reflect the use and availability of technology, expediting the initial hearing and ultimately the secret ballot election will be a disservice and disadvantage for every employee who might be affected by the outcome. This does not mean, or doesn't mean that there's not other ways to do it. It just appears that there's no compelling data to support the proposed changes. The organizing or representation process has significant implications for every party involved, be it labor, employer, or the affected employees. All of these stakeholders should have a reasonable amount of time to gather, present, assess, and analyze information. The current process and time frame seem to provide that level of reasonability, and there does not seem to be any data or outcomes that suggest the current time frames are not working. I've heard repeated concerns and accusations that the current time frame allows for intimidation of employees, which be reduced or eliminated. This type of illegal behavior is already addressed through ULP sanctions. If that's the case, address the penalties, address the bad actors, and consider increasing the sanctions for those offenses. Deal with the bad apples. Don't replace or go in and replant the orchard. My concerns with the proposed changes are not because of a pro or con anti-labor or company sentiment. My concerns are more importantly focused on the detrimental impact that will likely have on employees who are involved in making a decision on collective bargaining. Regardless of the size of the company that I've worked for, from a Fortune 100 to family-owned and operated, the day-to-day focus has always been on making or producing the product or service the company offers to the market. This has become increasingly more so in the past few years as the challenges of a difficult economy have required companies and employees to be as efficient and effective as ever to remain competitive and viable. There is little extra time to spend on issues or topics that are not time current or value added for the customer, including the subject of collective bargaining or the representation process. Given that over 90% of the private sector workforce is not covered by a collective bargaining agreement, it's reasonable to conclude that the average employee is unfamiliar not only with the representation process, but also with the pros and cons of a work environment where a collective bargaining agreement exists. Reducing the amount of time to provide this information to employees is a disservice to them and puts them at a disadvantage when they make their decision whether or not to support the idea of collective bargaining. They should be entitled to make an informed decision that includes giving consideration to all parties, labor as well as the company. It's reasonable to conclude that these employees have been given a plethora of information regarding the pros of collective bargaining from the labor organization prior to the filing of the petition with the board. This sharing of information is not subject to any similar time restriction prior to the filing of the petition. I think the notion of the belief that employees are regularly being given information by companies about the pros and cons of collective bargaining as a standard course of doing business is an unfounded assumption. The typical small company employee is wearing a number of hats on any given day and is, as I stated earlier, focused on doing his or her job to the best of their ability to help to keep the company competitive and viable. Ongoing training and education on the representation process and the accompanying legalities is not one of those regular activities. The typical response by an employer upon receipt of a petition includes developing a schedule and a plan to meet with employees to begin the education process. In my world, the production and distribution of ready-mix concrete, the logistics of this can be daunting given the nature of our business, the geographic distribution of our facilities, and the lean staffing that we have. Condensing the time frame to get this done is not only fair to each employee, it will most certainly disrupt the business such that customer service will be adversely affected, which will lead to lost contracts, lost revenue, and possibly lost jobs. None of these is in the best interest of employees. This lack of information also extends to the average employer. While many larger corporations have ready or convenient access to labor attorneys or experienced HR professionals either on staff or retainer, the average small business owner is not afforded the same luxury. The receipt of a petition for representation will set in motion an immediate search for an available and experienced resource in labor law to help understand the requirements of the petition and to adequately prepare for the hearing. Likewise, most do not have an experienced HR professional as an additional resource. As a result, when they receive the petition, the availability of a labor attorney to assist them in the process may take several days or longer to secure. May I have more time? Meanwhile, with the clock ticking, perfect timing, and the legal wrangling that goes into high gear, the affected employees are not given adequate or sufficient information or attention as the focus is on responding to the petition and preparing a response for the hearing. And as an HR professional, I can tell you that the focus on responding to the petition also reduces the amount of quality time and focus that a company gives to educating and training its managers on their legal responsibilities during the representation process. This alone can, and most likely will, result in an increase in unfair labor practice charges, which will ultimately end up taking more time on the part of the board. And the ultimate impact of these will be on the employees of the company, the stakeholders who should benefit from the proposed changes. The current representation process enables all stakeholders to provide information, review, assess, and analyze this information before a final decision is made through a secret ballot election by employees. It supports giving employees the opportunity to make an informed decision, not one that is rushed or hurried. I think all of us agree that we need time to gather and evaluate information when we make significant decisions that will affect and impact our lives, such as getting married, buying a home, as well as anything that has to do with our jobs and our careers. Why should we rush the representation process when there seems to be no basis, either in fact or reality, that such a change will ultimately benefit the overwhelming majority of employees who might be affected by the outcome of a representation election? In closing, I encourage the board to give serious consideration to who specifically will ultimately benefit from the proposed changes. It's my strong belief that none of the proposed changes will result in a more positive process for the employees affected. Based on this and this alone, I encourage the board not to pursue the proposed changes as they will ultimately affect those they are intended to help, the employees affected in this process. At the end of the day, we should all want a fair process, not just a fast one. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much for your comments. Other questions?
How many employees does Chandler Concrete have now?
425.
And are they partly organized, unorganized? What's the
No, we're
current
not
status?
organized. No, sir.
And has there been petitions in the recent past?
We've not had any, not since I've been working there, no, sir.
Thank you.
Does Chandler Concrete have an employee handbook that talks about unions?
Do we have a handbook that talks about unions?
Yeah.
We have a handbook and we have a simple statement that we believe in direct contact with our employees.
Okay, and organizing or unions are not mentioned in the handbook?
It's a union-free statement.
I see.
I'm curious, based on your experience doing this for some time, I guess?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. I, some years ago, once asked an attorney representing management what he thought was a fair time for an employer to conduct a campaign. What do you need? And he said, well, to be frank, I need a week. He said that there's sort of a standard routine campaign that's 4 weeks. 1 week to talk about this, second week to talk about this, third week this, fourth week. But he said, I can communicate it in 1 week. I've heard union people, union organizers say that, even from their own campaigns, that the longer it goes on, there comes to be a point after which it becomes, maybe not counterproductive, that's not the right word, but where it's kind of meaningless. It doesn't add that much to the to informing people. So I've heard management people say the same thing. I'm curious, from your perspective, what it fairly takes for an employer, and let's take the median size bargaining unit, which is what, 24. Your place of business right now is larger, but what do you think it would take to be able to inform your employees fairly of your views on unionization?
I think the current time frame is sufficient to a point. I think the comments that were made earlier by one of the speakers, in a small business, a truly small business, a 24 employee type operation, I think that there's a tremendous burden that's put on probably 1 or 2 or 3 individuals that are wearing so many different hats, that in order for that person to digest and understand the implications of the process, I think that the current time frame is at a minimum at best in terms of communicating. I think there can be too short a period, because again, we have to remember that we're trying to run businesses and we're trying to service customers. And in today's economy, I will tell you that once the attention is taken off of making or producing whatever it is that you do, and it is taken away from that customer, you have somebody standing right behind you that's ready to take those customers away from you. And anything that serves as a distraction in a shortened time frame is going to create an even greater, quote, distraction, if you would, time not spent on the reason that everyone is there. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I answered your question directly. I can't give you a certain time. I think, and again, 30 days, 45 days probably is on the short side, even in a small organization, because that person has so many different hats to wear.
Even in an organization that is having captive audience meetings once a week, or talking to its employees one-on-one, even in short periods of time, that you need to do this week after week after week?
Well, and again, very hypothetically speaking, I can't imagine many employers taking a tremendous amount of time away, again, from their day-to-day business, spending 8 hours in a meeting or 2 hours in a meeting day after day or week after week, because staffing is so lean now and the focus right now is on servicing customers. I guess I haven't seen that. I don't know anyone in my world of contact that would be able to do kind of what you're saying. That's why I think that 30 to 45 day window is probably a minimum.
Thank you for your comments. Anything else?
As a HR director, part of your responsibility would be to orient your managers into the labor relations issues.
Yes, sir.
So that would include organizing drives and how to respond to them and so forth. Wouldn't that be the case?
We don't get to that level of detail. We do have, obviously, some conversation and training about basic fundamental communications. If in fact talking about the do's and the don'ts, I guess, the tips, et cetera. That's the basic training that we provide, because anything beyond that is so hypothetical and speculative, and they have so many things on their plate that the chances of that kind of sticking, so to speak, is really not very great, and we do not go to that level of detail.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being with us today and sharing your thoughts.